In 1934, there was a hidden street in Laredo, Texas, known as La Calle de las Ollas, the Street of Pots. Before sunrise, the air carried the smell of chile negro, toasted corn, cinnamon, and slow-cooked goat fat. These meals were more than food. They were the memory of people who had lived on that land for centuries. But the pots slowly went silent. Children were punished for speaking Spanish, processed foods replaced traditional cooking, and ancient recipes were pushed aside by modern industry. This is the story of the forgotten meals that kept families alive through America's hardest decades. Meals erased not because they were weak, but because they were powerful enough to survive. Number 25, slow-cooked pot beans, a clay pot. Dried pinto beans, water drawn that morning. A sprig of epazote from the side yard. That was it. In the border counties of Texas and New Mexico throughout the 1930s, a pound of dried pinto beans cost 4 cents. 4 cents fed a family of 6 for 3 days, not as a side dish, as the main event, ladled into bowls with the dark mineral broth they cooked in, eaten with a piece of yesterday's tortilla pressed against the side to catch every drop. Here is what the food industry doesn't want you to know. Those beans cooked slowly in an earthen pot contained more bioavailable iron and more prebiotic fiber than almost anything that came in a can in 1955. Scientists confirmed it in the 1990s. We put it in a journal and kept selling canned beans at 60 times the cost. Today we call it heirloom bean broth and charge $14 a bowl in Brooklyn. They called it Tuesday. Number 24, hand-ground corn tortillas. She was up before anyone else. Always. The dried corn had soaked overnight in slaked lime water in a clay bowl on the floor. By 4 in the morning, she was at the grinding stone, her whole body weight pushing the softened kernels forward and back until the corn became something else. Not flour. A living paste that smelled of earth and mineral and something older than memory. That soaking process, nixtamalization, is one of the greatest nutritional discoveries in human history. It unlocks niacin, vitamin B3, that is otherwise completely unavailable to the human body. In the 1930s, pellagra killed tens of thousands of poor Southerners eating untreated cornmeal. It almost never touched the border community still grinding the old way. A kilo of dried corn cost 2 cents. The grinding took 2 hours. The result was irreplaceable. That is not poverty. That is knowledge so deep it looks like habit. Number 23. Beef scrap and dried chile stew in the butcher shops along the El Paso corridor in the 1930s. There were 2 piles of meat. One pile for the Anglo customers, the named cuts, the roasts, the steaks. The other pile was everything left over, neck bones, shank ends, cheek meat, beef shin still on the leg bone. This pile cost 3 cents a pound. The women of the colonia knew exactly what to do with it. Dried anko chile toasted until the kitchen smelled like dark chocolate and smoke. Garlic, cumin. The scraps went in whole, bones and all, and cooked for 4 hours until the connective tissue dissolved and the marrow slid clean from the bone. What they made was collagen-rich bone broth fortified with gelatin and deepened by capsaicin. A bowl fed 3 people for 9 cents. Today, that same broth, rebranded and poured into glass mason jars, sells for $9 for 12 ounces at Whole Foods. They knew things about humble ingredients that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. Number 22. Desert foraged wild greens, no store, no money. Just a walk along the dry creek bed before sunrise with a cloth sack and sharp eyes. Purslane, lamb's quarters, pigweed. All of them growing wild in the arroyos and irrigation ditches from West Texas to eastern Arizona. All of them free, all of them edible in a way that required knowledge to know and practice to use. Purslane alone contains more omega-3 fatty acids than any other leafy plant documented by nutritional science, more iron than spinach, more calcium, more vitamin E, 0 cost. Today, those same plants sell at farmers markets in Santa Fe and Tucson for $6 a bunch, described on handwritten chalkboard signs as heritage foraged greens, sustainably harvested. She harvested them sustainably because she had no choice and all the knowledge in the world. They harvest them sustainably because it is a brand strategy. Number 21. Roasted chile and goat cheese melt, not the Velveeta version. Not what you get at a stadium. In the villages of northern New Mexico in the 1930s, many families kept a goat in the yard. The goat gave milk every morning. That milk, heated and curdled with a squeeze of lime, gave fresh cheese in under an hour, crumbly white, slightly sour. Dried red chiles, a cent apiece, were toasted, soaked, and blended with garlic into a red sauce that smelled like a smoke-dried summer. The cheese melted into the chile sauce slowly over low heat until it became something neither solid nor liquid. Something you ate with a warm tortilla and forgot about everything else for a moment. This was not a party dip. This was the entire dairy and vegetable requirement for a family. The goat ate the desert scrub for free. The cheese cost only labor. The chiles cost a penny. Grandma just called it melted cheese. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 20. Sweet corn porridge. Thick, warm, the color of pale sand. Sweetened with a cone of raw brown sugar. Pressed into a cone shape at the market. And sometimes a stick of Mexican cinnamon that perfumed the whole kitchen with something soft and woody. This is corn paste dissolved in water and cooked until it thickens into something between a porridge and a drink. You could eat it with a spoon or drink it from a clay cup. It fed babies who couldn't chew. It fed the elderly whose teeth had gone. It fed the sick because it was the one thing the stomach accepted without argument. It fed field workers before a 12-hour day in the sun because it was dense and slow and the energy in it lasted. In the colonias of South Texas and Arizona in the 1920s and 1930s, a full pot of this porridge cost under 2 cents to make. That pot served 6 people breakfast. The corn paste provided complex carbohydrates. The raw sugar provided minerals, iron, calcium, potassium, that refined white sugar does not contain. The cinnamon, research now confirms, supports insulin regulation. Grandmothers gave this porridge to diabetic elders not because they read a study, because they watched what worked and remembered it. Today it appears on the brunch menus of upscale Mexican-American restaurants in Los Angeles and Chicago as traditional masa porridge for $16 a bowl. The word traditional is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Number 19. Rice soup with marrow bones. The butcher didn't charge for the bones. Bones were refuse. You asked, you got them wrapped in newspaper, you walked home. In the South Texas colonias of the 1930s and 1940s, this happened every week. The bones, beef, pork, sometimes chicken, went into a pot of water with rice at 3 cents a pound, a dried chile, an onion, a clove of garlic, and whatever herb was growing in the yard. What came out was not a side dish. What came out was dinner. The marrow fat, which rendered out of the bone during the long simmer, was in many households the only fat that went into the pot all week. It was what made the broth rich. It was what made the rice shine when you lifted a spoonful to the light. It was what coated the stomach and slowed digestion and kept a working man full through 8 hours of labor in a field or a mine or a rail yard. Marrow fat is approximately 50% monounsaturated fat, the same fat in olive oil. In 1940, a Colonia family in Laredo was eating the bone marrow equivalent of olive oil every week without spending a cent on it. The bones were free, the nutrition was extraordinary, and when the soup was done, the bones went back into the pot for the next day's water. Nothing wasted, nothing. Number 18. Sunday tripe and hominy soup, Sunday morning before church. The pot had been on since the night before, 10-12 hours of low heat, and the smell had worked itself into the walls and the curtains and the hair of everyone in the house. Tripe, hominy, dried red chile, oregano, lime. At 2 cents a pound in the 1920s and 1930s, tripe was the organ meat that no Anglo butcher put in the display case. It went to the back to the families who knew what to do with it. What you did with it was wash it 3 times in cold water with lime juice to clean it, cut it into squares, and let it cook overnight until it became something soft and yielding and entirely unlike what it started as. The hominy, dried corn kernels treated with lye until they bloomed open like white flowers, went in during the last 2 hours. A pot of this soup fed 10 people for under 15 cents. It delivered collagen for joint tissue, zinc for immune function, B12 for nerve health, and gelatin that coats the stomach lining in a way that antacid medications try and fail to replicate. The mythology says this soup cures hangovers. That mythology exists because it actually works. The glycine in the collagen supports liver detoxification. Grandma didn't know why it worked. She knew that it worked. That was enough. Number 17. Whole chicken and garden vegetable broth. The chicken lived in the yard until it didn't. This is a fact that modern food culture has spent enormous energy helping people forget. That food was once alive and the person cooking it was the one who made that transition happen. In the border communities of Arizona and New Mexico throughout the 1930s, backyard chickens were not a hobby. They were infrastructure. When the chicken stopped laying eggs, it became the pot. And nothing about that chicken was wasted. The feet, which contain more collagen per ounce than any other part of the animal, went in first. The neck, the back. The liver was reserved and eaten separately. The carcass cooked for 3 hours with whatever the garden gave. Squash, small zucchini, a dried chile, an onion, a handful of dried herbs. The broth that resulted was golden and slightly viscous from the collagen, and tasted of the herbs and the smoke from the cooking fire, and something else, something mineral and deep, that store-bought broth has never once replicated. That one bird ran 3 meals. The broth was the first. The picked meat went into the second. The bones, cracked to release the marrow, went into the third pot of water with rice or beans. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 16. Green chili strip and white cheese tamales. This was not a Christmas food. Not in the border communities of El Paso and Laredo and San Antonio in the 1930s and 1940s. This was a weekly food, and the making of it was a collective act. The tamale-making gathering. 10 women in one kitchen on a Saturday afternoon. Each one brought something. One brought the corn paste she'd prepared that morning. One brought the chile she'd soaked and blended. One brought the lard she'd rendered from the fat scraps the butcher gave away. The corn husks had soaked overnight in a bucket. The cheese, white, crumbled, salty, had been made from the goat's morning milk. For 3 hours they spread and filled and folded and stacked the tamales in the steamer. They talked while they worked. They argued and laughed and handed children pieces of raw corn paste to keep them quiet. By evening, every family that participated went home with enough tamales for the week. The cost in ingredients for a dozen tamales was under 10 cents. The cost in labor was distributed across 10 pairs of hands so that no one woman carried it alone. Today, a single tamale at a restaurant in Austin or San Diego costs $5. The woman who made it probably works alone. The knowledge of the communal tamale making, the cooperative economy of it, the social architecture of it, that is what was lost. The tamale survived. The community that made it possible did not. Number 15. Thick masa cakes stuffed with refried beans. Fat little corn cakes, thick as your thumb, cooked on the iron griddle until the outside crisped and the inside stayed soft and steaming. Split open with a knife and filled with refried beans, the beans mashed into a paste in the same pan they cooked in, mixed with a spoonful of lard until they were smooth and dark and fragrant. In South Texas in the 1930s, a serving of these stuffed corn cakes, 2 cakes, filled, cost under 3 cents in ingredients and delivered something nutritional science did not fully understand until 1971. Corn and beans together form a complete protein. The amino acids missing from one are present in the other. Lysine from the beans, methionine from the corn. Together they deliver every essential amino acid the human body requires. Separately, each is incomplete. Together they are equivalent to meat. Frances Moore Lappe wrote about this in 1971 in a book called Diet for a Small Planet. She was celebrated as a visionary. Border grandmothers had been doing it by instinct and tradition since before the Spanish arrived. They knew things about protein complementarity that nutritional science wouldn't confirm for another 300 years. They knew it because they watched their families thrive on it. That is not a coincidence. That is 3,000 years of careful observation recorded not in journals but in the muscle memory of women's hands. Number 14. Cactus paddle and egg scramble. The cactus paddle. Growing wild and free along every fence line, every dry creek bank, every stretch of desert road from West Texas to the California border. You cut them young. The tender new paddles that grew in spring, bright green, the size of a hand, and scrape the spines with a knife before dicing them into strips. In the pan, cactus paddles release a mucilaginous liquid as they cook. Thick, slightly sticky, the same texture as okra that disappears if you cook them long enough, or stays if you want it. In a scramble with eggs from the backyard hens with dried chile and a little onion, they turned an ordinary egg into something with texture and brightness and a flavor that tasted like the desert itself. Green and slightly tart, and entirely unlike anything from a store. The mucilage in cactus pads, the same substance that makes them feel slippery when cut, is now understood to slow glucose absorption in the bloodstream. Clinical studies published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology have confirmed what border healers observed for generations. Cactus paddle, eaten regularly, reduces post-meal blood sugar spikes. In communities where type 2 diabetes would eventually become an epidemic, this food was protection. When it disappeared from the diet and Wonder Bread took its place, the protection disappeared with it. Today, cactus juice sells for $8 a bottle at health food stores. Grandma just called it breakfast. Number 13. Dried hibiscus flower drink with raw sugar. Dried hibiscus flowers, a deep burgundy, almost black, papery, and slightly sour smelling when dry, steeped in hot water and sweetened with a cone of raw cane sugar and served cold in a clay pitcher on a summer afternoon. The color when you poured it was extraordinary. The dark red of old wine, of pomegranate, of something you wanted to keep looking at before you drank it. In the 1930s, a family in Tucson or El Paso could make a full pitcher of this drink for under 3 cents. Dried hibiscus was 1 cent per ounce at any market. Raw cane sugar was 2 cents. And what they were drinking, though they did not use this language, was an infusion of flavonoids and anthocyanins that multiple clinical trials have since demonstrated produce measurable reductions in blood pressure. ACE inhibitor activity. The same mechanism targeted by a class of prescription drugs developed in the 1970s. They drank it because it was beautiful and cold and sweet, and it was what you made when the money was gone, and the children were thirsty, and you needed something that wasn't water, but wasn't soda, because soda was for people with different problems. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 12. Day-old tortilla skillet with red chile sauce. The tortillas were 3 days old. They had gone stiff, beginning to crack at the edges. In any other food culture, this is the moment you throw them away. In the border kitchen, this is the moment they became something better than what they started as. Cut into quarters, fried in the little bit of lard left in the pan until they crisped and blistered, and turned the color of copper. Then the chile sauce, red or green, made from dried chiles, soaked and blended with garlic and a little cumin, poured over them in the hot pan where it sizzled and steamed and the chips absorbed it, softening at the center while the edges stayed crisp. An egg on top, or a spoonful of refried beans, or nothing at all. In the colonias of South Texas and Arizona in the 1930s through the 1950s, this dish was a daily problem solver. Stale tortillas, under 2 cents worth of ingredients, became a complete meal in under 10 minutes. There was no waste. There was never waste. Every stale thing had a destination, and the destination was always the pan. Today this dish appears on brunch menus in Los Angeles and New York at $18 a plate. The menu descriptions call it rustic and traditional. It is rustic because it came from a tradition of poverty so creative it produced genius. That is not a marketing angle. That is the truth the menu is borrowing without credit. Number 11. Warm goat milk rice pudding. Warm. Always served warm. Not hot. Warm. The temperature of something that came from a living animal not very long ago, which it had. Rice at 3 cents a pound. cooked until soft in fresh goat milk from the yard, sweetened with raw cane sugar and a stick of cinnamon and sometimes a strip of lime zest. It thickened slowly, the starch from the rice blurring into the fat of the goat milk. And when it was done, it was dense and pale and faintly golden from the cinnamon, and it smelled like a safe place. This was dessert in the border communities of New Mexico and South Texas throughout the 1930s. But calling it dessert misses what it was. It was a calorie delivery system for children who hadn't eaten enough during the day. It was warmth at the end of a cold evening. It was the thing a grandmother made when she could see that someone at the table needed something more than food, needed to be told, through the medium of warm, sweetened rice, that things were going to be all right. The goat milk provided casein protein and calcium, and the fat-soluble vitamins that cow's milk also provides, but with a fat molecule structure that is easier for many human digestive systems to process. Grandma didn't know any of this. She knew the goat was in the yard, and the rice was in the jar, and the child needed something warm. That was enough to know. Number 10. Emergency bloomed hominy soup, the emergency version. The one you made when the refrigerator was empty, and the money was gone, and there were still 6 people who needed to eat before morning. Dried hominy, corn kernels treated with lye until they expanded to 2 or 3 times their original size, blooming open at the top like a flower, at 3 cents a pound in the 1930s. Dried hominy fed 8 people from 1 pot. You soaked it overnight and it cooked for 4 hours and it was done. The broth was pale and slightly starchy and flavored with whatever the yard and the spice shelf gave you. Oregano, dried chile, a clove of garlic, salt. The hominy did something that untreated dried corn could not. The lye treatment, the same process used for corn paste, made the niacin available, made the lysine available, expanded the nutritional profile of the corn beyond what its raw form could offer. A pot of this soup made from 3 cents of hominy and whatever herbs were growing in the yard was not a desperate meal. It was a carefully constructed nutritional solution that had been refined over centuries specifically for the conditions of scarcity. Grandma just called it what's for dinner. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 10. Emergency bloomed hominy soup, the emergency version. The one you made when the refrigerator was empty and the money was gone and there were still 6 people who needed to eat before morning. Dried hominy corn kernels treated with lye until they expanded to 2 or 3 times their original size, blooming open at the top like a flower at 3 cents a pound in the 1930s. Dried hominy fed 8 people from 1 pot. You soaked it overnight, and it cooked for 4 hours, and it was done. The broth was pale and slightly starchy and flavored with whatever the yard and the spice shelf gave you: oregano, dried chile, a clove of garlic, salt. The hominy did something that untreated dried corn could not. The lye treatment, the same process used for corn paste, made the niacin available, made the lysine available, expanded the nutritional profile of the corn beyond what its raw form could offer. A pot of this soup made from 3 cents of hominy and whatever herbs were growing in the yard was not a desperate meal. It was a carefully constructed nutritional solution that had been refined over centuries specifically for the conditions of scarcity. Grandma just called it what's for dinner. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 9. Sandal-shaped stuffed corn flatbread. Named for the sandal, the long, flat oval of corn dough thicker than a tortilla, thinner than a corn cake, pressed by hand to the shape of a sandal sole, and cooked on the iron griddle until it blistered and charred in spots, and released from the surface with a sound like a dry leaf. In the South Texas colonias of the 1940s, one of these flatbreads fed a working man lunch for under 4 cents. The corn dough was the base. Beans went on top, mashed, garlicky, warm from the pan. Then whatever else was available. A spoonful of salsa, a few strips of chili, a crumble of fresh cheese if there was cheese, nothing if there wasn't. You ate it standing or walking or sitting on the running board of a truck, and it held together in your hand, because the corn dough was thick enough to take the weight of what was on it. This is the thing the food hall version at $14 does not tell you. This flatbread was engineered by necessity to be portable, filling, complete, and cheap. It was the lunchbox of a people who had no lunchbox. It was the convenience food of a tradition that had figured out convenience 2 centuries before the drive-through window. Number 8. Smoked chili and chickpea broth. The meatless version. Made on the weeks when there was no meat, which was most weeks. Dried smoked chiles, 1 cent each at the market. 2 of them, toasted in a dry pan until they softened and blistered and released their smoke into the kitchen air, then soaked in hot water for 20 minutes and blended with garlic into a dark, rust-colored paste. Into a pot of water, chickpeas cooked from dry, 3 cents a pound. This paste dissolved and became something extraordinary. Smoky and complex and deep, with the vegetal richness of the legume and the heat and the char of the chile, and an acidity from a squeeze of lime added at the end. This is the taste of depth, before English had a word for it. The browning reaction from the toasted chile, the natural flavor compounds in the dried legume, the smoke. Combined in a pot of water, these things created the sensation of meat without a gram of it present. A pot of this broth fed 4 people from 6 cents of ingredients. It needed no refrigeration because there was nothing in it to spoil. It could sit overnight and was better the next day. That is not poor man's soup. That is chemistry, practiced daily by women who never took a chemistry class and understood it better than most people who have. Number 8. Smoked chile and chickpea broth. The meatless version. Made on the weeks when there was no meat, which was most weeks. Dried smoked chiles, 1 cent each at the market. 2 of them, toasted in a dry pan until they softened and blistered and released their smoke into the kitchen air, then soaked in hot water for 20 minutes and blended with garlic into a dark, rust-colored paste. Into a pot of water, chickpeas cooked from dry, 3 cents a pound. This paste dissolved and became something extraordinary. Smoky and complex and deep, with the vegetal richness of the legume and the heat and the char of the chile, and an acidity from a squeeze of lime added at the end. This is the taste of depth before English had a word for it. The browning reaction from the toasted chile, the natural flavor compounds in the dried legume, the smoke. Combined in a pot of water, these things created the sensation of meat without a gram of it present. A pot of this broth fed 4 people from 6 cents of ingredients. It needed no refrigeration because there was nothing in it to spoil. It could sit overnight and was better the next day. That is not poor man's soup. That is chemistry, practiced daily by women who never took a chemistry class and understood it better than most people who have. Number 7. Border Ranch Camp Bread. The bread of the Mexican horseman, the bread of the original cowboy. Before there was a Texas Ranger, before there was a cattle drive mythology, before the word cowboy entered the American language, there was the vaquero, the Mexican horseman, who invented the tools, the techniques, the language, and the culture that American cowboy mythology eventually claimed as its own. The lasso is a Spanish word. The chaps are chaparreras. The rodeo is a Spanish word. The cattle drive, the branding iron, all of it came from the Mexican horseman tradition that families had been practicing on the borderlands for 200 years before anyone else arrived. And every morning, over a mesquite fire, they made camp bread. White flour, lard, salt, baking powder, a little water, worked into a rough dough and pressed flat and cooked in a cast-iron pan set over coals. The outside crisped to something almost cracker-like. The inside stayed soft and white and faintly smoky. It cost 2 cents a loaf. In the ranch communities of South Texas and New Mexico in the 1920s and 1930s, this bread was still made daily. Women made it in the morning. Workers carried pieces of it wrapped in cloth for lunch. It didn't need butter. It didn't need anything. It was complete The way simple things made correctly are always complete. The American cowboy story remembered the man on the horse. It forgot who taught him to ride, what he ate, and who made his bread. Number 6. Dry toasted vermicelli braised in chile tomato broth. This is not pasta. This is something older than pasta's presence in any Texas kitchen, and the technique is the thing, the technique that no box of angel hair can give you, no matter how long you cook it. You start with dry vermicelli noodles. You put them in a pan with a spoonful of hot lard and you toast them dry, straight from the package, stirring constantly until they turn the color of a penny and the kitchen fills with a smell like toasted grain and warm starch. This takes 3 minutes. This is the moment that makes this dish irreplaceable. The toasting closes the surface of the noodle, changes its texture fundamentally, gives it a nuttiness that survives the braising that comes next. Then the blended tomato and garlic and dried chile go into the same hot pan over the toasted noodles, and the whole thing sizzles and steams, and the noodles begin absorbing the liquid from the bottom up. You add water or broth, cover the pan, and in 12 minutes you have something entirely unlike boiled pasta. Toasted, yielding at the center, smoky from the dried chile, slightly sticky from the tomato starch. In the border communities of all the border states from the 1930s through the 1950s, this was the weeknight meal, vermicelli, at 4 cents a pound. Tomato, garlic, dried chili cents more. 1 pot. 20 minutes. Nothing wasted. This technique, toasting dry pasta in fat before cooking, appears in the Turkish tradition, in the Lebanese tradition, in the North African tradition. It is ancient and global and brilliant. And it was nearly lost when the boxed dinner mix arrived and told everyone that convenience meant opening a package. That is not progress. That is the replacement of a 400-year-old technique with a product that cost 50 times as much and produced a fraction of the flavor. Number 5. Green chile tripe soup with purslane. The green version. Less known than the red, more specific to the Arizona borderlands and the ranching communities that straddled the line. Tripe again cleaned, boiled long, cut into pieces, but this time in a broth, built from tomatillos and fresh green chiles, and the purslane that grew wild along every water source in the desert Southwest. The purslane wilted into the broth in the last 10 minutes of cooking, turning it a deep, almost murky green, and gave it an earthiness that the tomatillo's tartness cut through perfectly. The tomatillo provided vitamin C. The purslane provided the omega-3s. The tripe provided the collagen and the zinc and the extraordinary richness of slowly cooked organ meat. In a family of 8 in Tucson in 1938, a pot of this green tripe soup cost under 20 cents and fed everyone at the table twice, once that night and again the next morning, when it was always better. There was a woman in every colonia who was known for her version of this soup. People came to her kitchen on Sunday mornings the way people now go to brunch. She did not charge. She fed people because she had made enough, and she understood that feeding people was not a transaction, it was a practice. It was a form of community architecture that costs nothing when the ingredients are free and the labor is shared. Number 4. Red chili enchiladas with scrambled egg. The chile took an hour to make. That hour was the price of the meal, and also the reason it was extraordinary. Dried ancho chiles, 3 or 4 of them, the wrinkled dark pods that smell of raisins and earth when you first open the bag, stemmed and seeded and toasted flat in a dry pan until they softened and sent up a smoke that made your eyes sting slightly. Then soaked in hot water for 20 minutes. Then blended with garlic, cumin, a pinch of oregano, salt, and a cup of the soaking water until the sauce was dark and smooth and the color of old burgundy. Corn tortillas dipped in the hot sauce, laid flat in a pan, topped with scrambled egg and a crumble of white cheese and a sliver of white onion, folded over. 3 of them on a plate, no lettuce. No sour cream. Nothing on the side except a stack of warm tortillas and the rest of the sauce in a clay bowl for dipping. In the El Paso and New Mexico corridor in the 1930s, a plate of these enchiladas cost under 6 cents to make and delivered iron from the chile, complete protein from the egg and corn combination, and capsaicin from the dried chiles that stimulated circulation and metabolic rate. Grandma just called it lunch. She made it on a Tuesday with no ceremony and no recipe written down anywhere. The recipe was in her hands. When her hands were gone, so was the recipe, unless someone remembered, unless someone watched carefully enough. Number 3. Sweet raisin tamales. The sweet ones, the ones children waited for, the ones that appeared at the communal tamale making alongside the savory versions, made from the same corn paste but sweetened with raw cane sugar and mixed with lard, beaten until it was white and airy and smelled faintly of something almost floral. The filling was simple. Raisins soaked until soft, sometimes a little shredded coconut that arrived at the border market from the coast. Sometimes just the corn paste itself, sweetened and tinted pink with a little beet juice or red coloring when the family could afford it. Wrapped in the corn husk, steamed. Unwrapped to reveal something that looked almost festive, pale, pink, or ivory, spotted with dark raisins, fragrant with cinnamon and raw sugar. They were not dessert in the sense that they came after the meal. They were dessert in the sense that they were made with extra care and given to children and eaten slowly, standing in the kitchen while the steam from the tamale pot still fogged the window. They were evidence that poverty and pleasure were not mutually exclusive, that a family with almost nothing could still make something beautiful and sweet, and given specifically to the children because the children deserved something beautiful too. A dozen sweet raisin tamales in 1940 cost under 8 cents in ingredients, what they cost in love and labor and accumulated knowledge that is not a number. Number 2. Thick hot chocolate corn porridge. Thicker than the plain corn porridge. Darker. The smell of it coming through the wall of the house in the morning was the smell of being safe. This is corn paste dissolved in water and cooked until thick, then deepened with Mexican chocolate, the coarse ground dark chocolate mixed with cinnamon and sugar that came in rough discs wrapped in paper from the market. A disc of chocolate dissolved into the hot porridge, stirred constantly with a wooden spoon or a carved wooden whisk. One of the first tools a young woman was given when she set up her own kitchen, until it was smooth and hot and thick enough that the spoon stood up in it. In the border communities throughout the 1920s and 1930s, this was the cold morning drink, the winter morning drink. The drink you made when someone was sick or grieving or simply cold and in need of something that cost almost nothing and delivered everything. A pot of it for 6 people cost under 5 cents. A disc of dark chocolate at 2 cents. Corn paste at a penny. Raw sugar at 2 cents. Water for free. The flavonoids in dark chocolate improve blood flow and reduce inflammatory markers. The corn paste provided complex carbohydrates. The fat in the chocolate provided satiety. The cinnamon supported insulin regulation. The warmth of it, held in a clay cup between 2 cold hands on a February morning in New Mexico, that is not measurable by any instrument of nutritional science, but it was real. It was as real as anything. Number 1. Corn paste and salt. That is the whole recipe. In the worst years, the years when the work had dried up and the garden had nothing left and the money was gone and there would be nothing else, until something changed. A woman mixed the last of the corn paste with water and a pinch of salt and cooked it on the iron griddle. Flat rounds, slightly thicker than a tortilla, cooked until they had dark spots and smelled of corn and heat. Nothing on them, nothing with them. This fed children. This fed working men who went out in the morning into whatever the day had. This held a family together on the days when holding together was the only goal left. It was the distillation of everything, of the nixtamalization that made the corn nutritionally complete, of the generations of knowledge embedded in the hands that shaped it. of the dignity that refused to call hunger a reason to stop eating together at a table, of the understanding that the simplest things, made with the most knowledge, are never truly poor. In the Rio Grande Valley in 1933, a woman could feed her family of 5 for 2 cents with corn paste and salt. She did not call it survival food. She did not call it anything. She put it on the table, and they ate it, and they were still there the next day. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Closing. Bring the thick hot chocolate porridge back to the stove. Soak the hominy tonight. Toast the dried chiles tomorrow morning until the smoke rises and your eyes sting and your kitchen smells like something that was almost lost. The women who made these meals were not making do. They were not cooking from desperation. They were practicing an accumulated science of nourishment, 3,000 years of knowledge about corn and legume and foraged green and slow-cooked bone that took this country less than 30 years to dismantle. They did it with government pamphlets and school policies and mass deportations and a food industry that needed people to forget what they already knew so they could sell them something worse at a higher price. The grandmothers of the border knew things about feeding a family that no nutrition label has ever captured. They knew it in their hands and in their pots and in the pre-dawn dark of their kitchens when everyone else was still asleep. They were not primitive. They were not poor cooks making poor food. They were geniuses working in a tradition so deep it looked like instinct. The food industry won. For a few decades, they won completely. But you are here, and the recipes exist. And the wild purslane is still growing along the arroyo if you know where to look, and dried hominy still costs less than $1 a pound, and the dried chiles are at the market right now, and the knowledge, most of it, is still recoverable. 1 pot this week, just one. Comment below and tell me which one your grandmother made.